to introduce Kirk Bloodsworth, who was the first person in the United States to be exonerated for DNA, the use of DNA. And he's from Maryland, and he spent time on death row in Maryland, and he now is one of the greatest advocates for the abolition of the death penalty. And here he is. He's also my friend.
Thank you so much, Phyllis, and everybody, and Amnesty folks. My name is Kirk Bloodsworth, and I am the Advocacy Director for Witness to Innocence. You see this big shirt. We have an organization too. And it is by and for death row survivors, people who have been exonerated and are now free and have been found innocent in prison. But my other distinction, as Phyllis said, was I am the first death row inmate in the United States to be freed by post-conviction DNA testing. I spent a total of 8 years, 10 months, and 19 days in prison, and 2 years on death row for a crime I didn't commit. All this happened in Maryland many, many years ago. In 1984, a little girl by the name of Dawn Hamilton was found brutally murdered in a wooded area near her home. A search ensued for the killer, who was described as follows: 6'5", curly blonde hair, bushy mustache, tan skin, and skinny. Well, you can all see. I have to tell you that my hair was as red as a fire plug back in those days, and I had sideburns down to the side of my cheeks. My mustache was red, and I wore glasses, and I had a missing tooth in the front. And I don't tan. I'm about 6 foot tall. This all started based on 2 identification witnesses saying that the person they saw was this tall and so forth. And a next door neighbor calling the police and said, the composite sketch looks like my neighbor, Kirk. And you can read the entire story on Bloodsworth, the true story, first death row inmate exonerated about DNA, and by Tim Junkin. And the movie documentary is soon to follow. I have to tell you that I was an honorably discharged Marine with no criminal record or criminal history. I'd never been arrested for anything in my life. And the next thing I know, and then from the time I was arrested on August 9th, 1984, when a big knock came on the door, and the police were busting in my house, and my cousin's house where I was staying, and step outside, Mr. Bloodsworth, you SOB. Handcuffed me and put me in a police car, and that was the last time I seen my town I was 23 years old, and never seen it again until I was 31. I went through a trial, didn't have a lot of money. My father tried, you know, we did everything we could for those 8 years. He put his house up for sale and mortgaged his house and did everything he could. And I had really, really bad lawyers. I had every lawyer I had up until the last lawyer I had was awful. I had there was my first lawyer, and then I love telling this story now. I didn't like it at the time, but I want you guys to picture a prison visiting room, if you can. Now with a glass partition, okay? And so your lawyer comes in off the street through an archway that's 8 foot high and 10 foot wide. And he sits with his back to a brick wall, and he starts talking to you. He says, Kirk, and he's talking to me, and he says, Kirk, you're in a lot of trouble. I thought it was very astute of him. He said, but don't worry, I know my way around the courtroom. I know my way around the criminal justice system. I'm going to find our way out of here together. And I started feeling a little better. You know, he gave me a little courage, and I just knew I was in deep trouble. So we talked about the case for about 20 minutes. One of only 3 visits this man ever came to see me in the 8 months it took to send me to death row. And right before he gets ready to leave, he reiterates what he said in the beginning. I know my way around the courtroom. I know my way around the criminal justice system. We're going to find our way out of here together. He put his hand on the glass to say goodbye, picked up his briefcase, turned around, and ran right into the wall. He was right, I was in a lot of trouble. But the trial lasted about 2 weeks, and I had all these people came forward. This whole thing was based on a composite sketch. Not like I would be an artist rendering that I would do your composite sketch or anybody here by pencil or something, as you were telling me. This was done by a kit made from Disney. Sets of overlays, eyes, ears, noses, mouths, jawlines, hairlines, mustaches, sideburns, so forth. And it was compiled. You have 25 choices of each. And it's put together to compile a face. Now, the two main witnesses in this case were two little boys. And they had, the older of the two little boys was 10, he was 10, the younger was 8. And the younger one couldn't do the composite sketch. The older boy still wasn't happy with the composite sketch after he first done it. He said the hair was wrong, and he said the eyes were similar, but they weren't quite the same, and the mustache wasn't right, and it was all kinds of different things. And the police just let them ask him why the mustache wasn't right. And then the little boy said, well, his mustache kind of went over on both sides, like, you know, like that, and just stopped on either side. The guy said, we were like a Fu Manchu. The boy's 10 now, you know. What a Fu Manchu. But he showed him the picture of the celluloid thing of a Fu Manchu, and he wouldn't put it on there. The police officer said it didn't look right to him. And just remember that now, because it's very important. So they show him a picture that was, I gave him a photograph. They questioned me earlier the day before I was arrested at 2:45 in the morning. And I said, look, everybody knows about it. My ex-wife and I, we were having problems at that time. I just left. I went back to to Cambridge, Maryland, where I lived about 100 miles away from where the crime happened. And I said, I heard, everybody heard about it. It's on the news, it's in the paper, it's everything, it's everywhere. Flashing this composite sketch all over the city and all over the state of Maryland. And nobody had a clue. Suspects were talked to. There was many suspects in this case. There was several. There was a suspect who, his name was Kimberly Shea Ruffner, who was let go 2 weeks before Dawn's murder for 2 attempted rapes of 2 other little girls. And his police report came in 9 days or 8 days before I was arrested, and they never went back to check him out. Several other suspects, it doesn't have any importance. None of the other suspects were ever implicated or ever even questioned really, and none of them did it. So I'll let you off the hook right there. The trial lasted about 2 weeks. I have all these people pointing me out in the courtroom, one right after the other. 5 identification witnesses positively identified me as the last person seen in, around, or with Dawn Hamilton that day. And I was just, you guys are crazy. And they had a lineup. I was arrested on a Thursday, so they had a lineup on that coming Monday. They called each and every witness in the case and said, look, we're going to have a lineup on a Monday, don't watch television. Don't watch it. Everybody in the Dawn Hamilton murder case watched me on television the entire weekend. They had seen it. So they come to the lineup's held, the 2 little boys come, everybody comes. Nobody identifies me in the lineup, the two little boys. It wasn't until 2 weeks later their parents called the Baltimore County Police Department where the crime had happened in their jurisdiction and said, our children have made a mistake, it's really number 6. And that's the position I stood in. Well, I had an alibi. I was home all day, just about. I even had a girl came forward and said she gave me some pot. You know, I just tried to find every single person a check I cashed, people I was with, everywhere. I was not alone the entire day, and this had happened sometime around 12 or so, and they found the body at 2:30 that afternoon. And it was a horrible murder. Dawn Hamilton was a 9-year-old little girl that never heard a soul, was out playing hide and go seek with her friends that day. And she was bludgeoned and just totally destroyed. And I'm not going to get into it because it's god awful and ghastly. But that's what I was accused of. Honorably discharged Marine, no record, and I was going to death row in Maryland. But after the trial was over and the 2 weeks were done, the gavel came down on my life, and the sentence was death. The courtroom erupted in applause. Give him the gas and kill his ass. That's what they were saying. It just, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to talk to. My mother was crying in the front row, and my dad was trying to interject to the judge. They carted me off to one of the worst prisons in the United States at the time, the Maryland Penitentiary at 954 4th Street, Baltimore City. 2 weeks before I got there, a guard had been disemboweled from a perceived insult from another inmate. And you can just imagine what it was like going to prison, charged with this kind of thing. Everybody was after me. I became the most hated man in the state of Maryland for no other reason than somebody making a finger point at me. I was in a cell that I could take 3 steps from the back wall to the cell door, to the front cell, to the cell door, touch either wall by sticking my hands out and just going like that on either side. Stainless steel toilet and sink in the corner, and a metal rack was my bed. This was my home for a long time. I could hear the calls coming, and when that 400-some-pound door slammed shut, my life was over. I still remember it today. It sounding reminiscent to a tailgate of a dump truck when it closed it. Just like it's dumping me out, into the sea of humanity. And I realized then, wow, if this could happen to me, it's probably going to happen to a lot of people, because they didn't want to hear a thing I had to say. Not one thing. Just wanted me to take it. You did it. You got to own up to it. And the gas chamber was the mode of execution back in those days. And they were basically going to take, cyanide pellets and drop them into sulfuric acid and choke me to death. They had painted it, and they would kill a pig in it every year just to test and see if it would work. You could hear that thing screaming sometimes. And this was my life. On about 1986, the end of 86, I was convicted in 85. My case was overturned by the Court of Appeals of Maryland based on prosecutorial misconduct and them hiding a police report about another suspect. And it's called Brady material. And this is very happens all the time. Prosecutors hide evidence so they can win. And they're not so much interested in the truth as they are about winning the case. And I had a couple prosecutors that were ready to do that at any step. Did anyone believe me? Oh, he did it, he did it, he did it, he did it. And I just kept telling them, no, I didn't. I was writing letters every day, signing them letters, and when I would sign them, I'd say, respectively submitted, Kirk Bloodsworth, A period, I period, M period. And then it's a man. I just fell on deaf ears. Nobody wanted to listen to me. Bad lawyer, another lawyer came. In my second trial, he was worse than the first one in a different way. This time, he was just really slick. After halfway through the trial, he was doing so good up until that point. He really had the cops looking bad, and it was all awful, and he was really doing a thing and proving it. As soon as my dad paid him the last money, he turned around and said, we need cops like you. He did a 180 from his present position. And he turned out he was a state's attorney in Baltimore City. And I didn't trust anybody anymore. Convicted again. This time I was sentenced to double life. I wound up going back to prison, an innocent man. Already working on, 5 years in, and then 6 years in, and then 7 years in, and then 7.5 years in. I was a prison librarian for 7.5 years. I seen a lot of stuff when I was in prison. I mean, prison's not a very good place for anybody, whether you did it or not. I mean, I knew guys that actually didn't want to be there so bad they put both of their eyes out with two pencils. Drinking Brasso from the shop and all different kinds of things that they would do to try to escape and hang themselves. Take a lot of pills and then put a plastic bag around their head and choke out. This was my life. And, you know, I got hit in the head with a sock full of batteries. I got stabbed in the calf with a welding rod. I got hit in the chest with a master lock on a sheet rope. My life was over. And here I was only almost 30 years old now. I was a prison librarian, I think I mentioned that, for 7.5 years. I read everything from Gestalt psychology to Stephen King. Please, nobody ask me what that Gestalt book is about, because I have no idea. That was trying to say. But it's about quantum thinking or something. But anyway, I read this, everything I could get my hands on. One day I was sitting in my cell, and this guard puts these books in, and I don't know how I got them to this day. I think it was one of them book clubs or something, and there was a book in there called The Bloody. When the first time, it was a detailed account of the first time a new technology was ever used in a criminal case called DNA. Back in 1989, that wasn't really prevalent. It only had been done one other time in America by Gary Dobson. It was in a rape case, and the rape victim recounted her story anyway. And nobody on death row had ever, I was the first person on death row to ever ask for a DNA test. The problem was that I wrote the prosecutor. I said, look, I want to take this new DNA test. It'll prove once and for all I'm an innocent person. And she wrote me back. She said, well, Mr. Bloodsworth, because they had slides, swabbings, possible semen stain on her underclothes and everything. And she wrote me back, and this is what she said. She said, dear Mr. Bloodsworth, we regret to inform you that DNA evidence has been inadvertently destroyed. And I don't know how you inadvertently do it as a prosecutor, but they were the same way they probably inadvertently never gave me the other suspects. But I didn't believe them. And I had a lawyer who is a judge now in Washington, D.C. His name is Bob Moore. And Bob was appointed to the bench in the Superior Court of D.C. by Bill Clinton some years ago, and has been on the bench basically since I've been out of prison. And he went to the Towson courthouse to look for the evidence. He said, Kirk, I've been there like 3 times, just 2 times. They've done something with it, we can't find it. I said, go back and check one more time. So he goes back, sure enough, the evidence is not in the evidence room where it's supposed to be. And he's getting ready to leave and come back to Baltimore I'm at the Jessup Annex now, to come back to the prison and tell me that, I'm probably going to have to spend the rest of my life in this place for something I didn't do. He was getting ready to leave and happened to pass the court clerk in the hallway. And he said, Bob, what are you doing here? He asked my lawyer, I said, well, I'm looking for the Dawn Hamilton evidence in the Kirk Bloodsworth case. He said, well, I know where that's at. It would wound up being in a paper bag in a cardboard box in the judge's closet sitting in the floor. And there was the evidence to my freedom. We sent it to one of only 2 labs that were open at the time, Forensic Science Associates in California. There was one in Boston, but Boston and the FBI had not yet come online. Dr. Edward Blake was a big supporter of that. He works with Jim Mikulski and all these guys, and has really been instrumental in getting a lot of people out. So he was the best leading geneticist in the country at the time. And they were going to do a test of exclusion. So he looked through all the evidence. It took him a year. And every time I get to this part, I think about someone that's very near and dear to me, and that was my mother. She passed away just a few months before I was released from prison. And I miss her a whole lot. I was sitting in my cell one day, and we had been waiting, and I was, very lonely and missed my mom, and because she weren't coming to the visits anymore. It was just my dad. My dad and I would just sit there and cry, and You know, this whole thing just ate us all up, and I was 31 years old. You know, it's like my whole life was gone in my 20s, and from the 80s, from 84 to 93, it was over. And it was sometime in April, 21 years ago, this next month. And I was sitting on it, and the guard put a post-it note in my cell door. And it said, urgent, call your attorney, urgent. So I go down to the phone and I call Bob Moore, millionth time collect, because he's calling like 10 times a day. You know? And he would answer every single one. He was a very good lawyer and a very good man. And he, you know, Bob Moore's not a very good talker. He's not loud like I am. You know, he doesn't have a gregarious voice. He's very soft-spoken. You know, he talks really almost like a whisper. I don't know how the judges ever heard him when he speaks, but he was screaming on the other line. Kirk, you're innocent, man. You're innocent. Oh, I know that. I'm going to get out of here, Bob. Help me out. On June 28, 1993, I stepped out of the Maryland Penitentiary as a free man, the first person to ever be released and exonerated based on post-conviction DNA testing. From then on, I went from from being a commercial fisherman on the eastern shore of Maryland all my life to being an activist. And I did it pretty much as soon as I got out. Like, it was like a week later, I was sitting in front of Don Edwards' subcommittee talking about the innocence and the death penalty. I've been talking about the death penalty and post-conviction DNA testing for 21 years now. And I know the death penalty is the wrong thing to have. 10 years after I got out, you know, there was a lot of controversy about DNA back in those days. Everybody thought DNA wasn't that great a thing. And it really based on who's doing the testing and what they tested. And, you know, we can manipulate the system in any kind of ways. This is all about integrity, you know. But there was no question, because my guy that did my test, he set the FBI lab up. He's the one that put it online himself. And Dr. Everett Blake is, without blemish, he's a very good man. Half of one cell is what wound up freeing me, and I was excluded as a deposit of semen. I received a full pardon from the Governor William Donald Schaefer of Maryland at the time, and $300,000 for my trouble, which all went back to the lawyers after I got, for the exception of about 80 grand that I just blew anyway. I didn't know what else to do, but I had to fight the one thing that almost killed me, and that was the death penalty in Maryland. And as you all know, sitting here, most of you should know, that Maryland is without the death penalty, by and large, to a lot of work that I did and others like Susan Graham and Witness Innocence. We were right on point in that place, and I never let them breathe. I just constantly, they mentioned my name 64 times in the Senate hearing alone, and it was truly one day when the weight of the world fell off my shoulders. And I've been involved in Connecticut, New Jersey, and different ones, and recently we just went down to Delaware. As it turned out, 10 years later, I was sitting in my office and the prosecutor calls me on the phone. And I'm going to end it with this, because you know how powerful DNA and truth really is. And the prosecutor said, she called me on a Friday, and I'll never forget it. It was, on Thursday, and she said, I want to talk to you, but I can't tell you over the telephone, but I'll meet you anywhere in your town of Cambridge to have an update on the Hamilton murder, but I want to tell you in person. And I thought, okay. And although I really didn't know what to say to her, I said, sure. Because there was a lot of things I thought I could say to her at the time, but I wanted to put an end to this thing. And she sat down in a local restaurant in Cambridge, Maryland, and told me the real killer was Kimberly Shea Ruffner, the one that they had the police report about 9 days before I was arrested, and they never went back to check. And he was not 6'5". He was 5'6". and 160 pounds. It is, without question, the death penalty is one of the most arbitrary and worst policies in the United States. We cannot no longer trust our system to, if we can't trust our government to move snow, we should not allow them to execute our citizens. And I do not trust our government to do that, and or move snow. And I just want to say that I'm opposed to the death penalty for this reason. And I know it's morally, it shouldn't happen. And Amnesty is taking a big stance on it, how immoral it is, and it's just a basic, it's just not right to take another person's life, like kicking somebody when they're down. I mean, we have other ways to punish these people and best practices that we can keep the society safe without executing our citizens. I realized that long ago. We have 143 people in the United States who have been exonerated.
144.
Excuse me?
144.
I stand corrected. Glenn Ford, just a couple days ago, was exonerated from DPIC's list. And it is amazing thing that we've had that many in a prison population of a death row that's 3,100 plus. You can't imagine that we can still support a sentence of death with that many mistakes. You know, we have been talking for days about this plane that's missing from Malaysia. How about all the people that sat down in death row and been innocent? Why are we talking about that? And we need to start talking about these things, and we need to start doing something about it. In a state like Pennsylvania right here, one of the biggest issues for me is it's DNA testing, and it is it's just bad lawyering up front. I mean, the lawyers up front make you so bad that they're coming back. In the days from Abraham, they're all coming back. So witness to innocence, along with partners of Pennsylvanians for Abolition death penalty, and Kathleen and all of us, and Danny Cook and certain people were going to start a Philadelphia moratorium campaign. We really kicked it off last year to get Seth Williams or the city of Philadelphia to stop seeking death sentences in and around the city, and kind of spread it out like a pebble in the pond. So eventually the entire state will be death penalty free. I'd like to say that could happen tomorrow, but this is Pennsylvania. And so it's going to be tough, but we can all do it if we do it together. We have a postcard campaign that we're going to run, and you can talk to people like the wonderful and amazing Kathy Spillman, who is sitting over there, who is our program officer and outreach director for Witness to Innocence. And we're going to have this campaign, and we need anybody's support. I have to tell you, it's as plain as the nose on my face. I look out in this public, and I just came from Geneva, Switzerland, and spoke in front of the High Council on Human Rights, and looked out in front of the world, basically, and told them the same thing. I look at myself when I look at you, and I don't want it to happen to you, and the world does not need a death penalty. Get up, stand up, and hold your head up. And even when it gets rough, you get tough. Don't stop. And we need all the support you can, and support your exonerees when you see them. Thank you very much.
Who's got questions? Yes.
Do you harbor any resentment against your neighbor who implicated you first?
Absolutely not. I don't harbor any ill feelings or ill will. I've forgiven everybody that that has had hand in this. I just cannot. It's what I want to do is do something about it. Light a candle instead of curse the darkness. That's my deal. Yes, over there.
Can you talk a little bit more about the randomness of that guard or the clerk asking, what are you looking for here? Here it is in the box, where at first they did it?
Well, it wasn't hid. The judge left it in his closet from the last trial and forgot about it. They locked the door. He never went back in it. It was in and he happened to see it a couple of days before, sitting in the floor. New Hampshire passed the House vote 225 to 104 in favor of repeal. So witness innocence has been there. I started going there in October. We've sent Suja Graham down there just recently too. So it's really hot. Delaware, we passed through the Senate 11 to 10 last year. And it's sitting on the table and we're trying to get it through the House. That's going to be a little bit problematic in the sense that it's just a different state. It's a police officer is the state's is the House president, and he's running the votes in and out of there. So it's a dynamic, but we're working on it. I think we got a chance. Oregon this year put or was it Washington? It was Washington State. Governor Inslee put a moratorium on the death penalty in the state of Washington. So, and they have a moratorium on it pretty much in Oregon as well. And, you know, different states all across the country. I think Kentucky is, we just sent Sabrina Butler down there. She's doing a legislative work all through the state of Kentucky, and right at the legislature, got a standing ovation yesterday. She's one of the only women who have been exonerated and on death row, Sabrina Butler, for killing a child. And she's number one. She's the first woman who's ever been.
And the only, yeah.
And the only woman so far. So, and, you know, there's repeal bills in Kansas and everything, but places like Kansas are trying to speed up the process. They just passed a bill to make your appeals take less time so they can put you away and put you to death. And these kind of things we're also in opposition to. So we have to fight it on multiple fronts and to stop different legislative bodies. Yes?
Any work in Texas or?
Oh, there's always work in Texas. We'll probably be working in Texas for the rest of our lives. But it's, that's another place, you know, and they're constantly, they just ignore, and it's really ironic that most of the states that have the most exonerations, like Florida, for instance, and Texas, are the ones that oppose any type of repeal effort. I mean, you know, that's collateral damage, they say, basically, to the public. And, well, you know, we're not going to have it. You know, we need to get the governors like Rick Perry and those kind of cats out of there. Yes?
In states that do have the death penalty, what factors decide whether somebody gets the death penalty or a life sentence?
Well, it depends on the court within the state. Most jurisdictions have bifurcated trials. So you have the innocence phase, they call it, and then a death phase. So you have to go through all these. If you get convicted and sentenced, you get convicted in the trial, and then they have a sentencing phase. It's a whole separate other trial process to that. And then they say whether or not, you know, you get the death penalty. And it's counted by mitigators and aggravating circumstances. Obviously, the aggravators, if have more than the mitigators, you get the death penalty most of the time. And the other point is death qualified juries. You know, people who, you know, it's a whole big harangue about, you know, asking a person, well, would you give the person a death sentence if they can get life without parole? All these different little factors involved. But the big problem in the United States is lethal injection regulations. That's one of the big hotbeds right now. They're trying to get the drugs. They can't get them from Europe to do it because Europeans, they just don't want us to kill people. So they're trying to get us now. The companies are, Texas, I think it was Texas, who passed the law, or Kentucky, was one of them that said they didn't have to tell anybody where they were getting the drugs from.
Yeah. Missouri, Alabama.
It's just, and then you got places like Kansas, and everybody's running short of these drugs. So, because you can't use them after a certain date, they don't store well and all this stuff. And so the companies are not giving it to them. That's a big deal. And, you know, to me, it doesn't matter the mode of execution. It shouldn't take place to start with. And we just have to come to that conclusion. And as long as we have the court, we have the Supreme Court we have now, where you have a justice that says, and this is a quote from him, that factual innocence is no reason to stop a death sentence properly rendered. So if you're innocent, if you've been convicted fairly, it's okay. We can kill you. Anthony Scalia. Yes.
It sounds like life in prison is actually worse because people are killing themselves.
I would agree with that assessment. Life is probably a better punishment. And I know there's a big argument, and some of you guys are going to jump on me, but you know, I'm about winning too. I'm kind of using the ball against their hardball. So we can work on that as we go along. And mass incarceration, you were talking about. That's why I brought mass incarceration up. We have a prison population of 2.3 million in the United States. Oh my God, and it's growing exponentially every year. We're privatized prisons. Somebody's got to put a halt to that, or we really going to have a new slave trade within the United States. And so we have to have multiple fronts on this thing, but the death penalty is a bad policy, and we can't have it. I'll take one more question, and I'll give it to Kathy.
I'm sorry, it's not really a question. I just wanted, to thank everybody for having us here today and to visit our website. It's new, it's very interactive, it's beautiful, and like us on Facebook.
Yeah.
And I will see that to him, because he did have the last question.
Witnesstoinnocence.org.
Yeah.
That's our witnesstoinnocence.org. Send us some money too, we need it.
The Pennsylvania legislature was supposed to meet in December of last year, and I'm wondering if
Yes.
that happened.
Yeah, they're studying the death penalty here in the state of Pennsylvania, and they're also, Seth Williams is one of the studiers, so they have to do a cost analysis. I think it's holding them up, so, but it's coming. You know, we might have to drag and kick people through to this new world, but some things, it's like my mom always said, you don't believe it today, but it's really good for you. So I think that's the best way we have to do with the public. We have to just keep pumping and keep going and light that candle. Thank you very much.